Hi, and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger. And joining me on this show is Jeff White, who is the Calaveras County building official. And I'm very pleased to have you on the show, Jeff. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. So before we get into the intricacies of what it is to be a building official and talk about the building department and its function, for those who don't know you, I wanted to just give them a little history. So it sounds like you've spent most of your life in Calaveras County.
That is correct. I've lived in Calaveras County and went to high school here. I've probably been here since 1955 or something in that neighborhood. Went to grammar school at White Pines and left a couple of brief times, but for the most part, yes, I've been here a long time.
So when you were going through the school system, have things changed significantly since those days?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, the Bret Harte High School, which is the high school I graduated from, wasn't a unified district in those days. It was just a little Bret Harte High School. I was one of the largest graduating classes in 1967. There was 45 of us or something like that. So yes, that has changed, and the whole Highway 4 corridor has changed, and it's the development and the features and everything is quite different than it was then.
You think it's for the better?
It's if it's managed properly, it can be for the better, and that was back in the days when it used to snow, believe it or not.
Yeah, what is snow?
It doesn't do that anymore.
A white substance of some kind?
That's what we've been hearing. Yeah.
Okay, and then when you were younger and running around the hills, what were some of your interests?
Well, mostly fishing. I fished a lot, still to try and fish as much as I can. Some hunting, and I used to ski and those types of things. Just go up on Highway 4 in Ebbets Pass when it was a one-lane road from Angels Camp all the way to Markleyville, and it took you quite a while to get there.
Did you have to avoid cattle drives ever?
Yes.
Oh, you did?
Actually,
okay.
They did have those going on.
Wow. Very cool. I mean, I would have loved to have seen the county back then, but we've grown up a lot. Still, it seems like this county is, very much has not experienced the growth that the counties to the north and south in terms of some of the big box stores and some of the population. But would you say that the county is starting to recover from the slump we went through?
It's showing signs of recovery, absolutely. I believe that our numbers, unofficial numbers from construction activity, or at least permit activity from last year at this time, has probably been an increase of somewhere around 30 to 33%, which is encouraging. The reports from the surrounding jurisdictions, which I'm keep in touch with quite often, they're showing lots of signs of growth as well. They're starting to find that they're getting backlogged as also professional designers, architects, engineers, draftspersons, any type of associated trades are starting to get booked up. So yes, they're starting to be a real dramatic turnaround. How long it'll last is anybody's guess.
Right, yeah, you kind of never really know what's going to happen, and we're going to get into how that directly impacts your department. But I was curious, when you were, let's say, in your college days and high school, what were your aspirations? Were they to be in this line of work?
No. I kind of inherited this profession through various careers. My intent was to be in natural resource management in college. That was my major with the intent to go into some field of that nature. My father was a building contractor when I in high school, so I worked for him in the summertime and learned enough about the trades and kept falling back. And I have had different occupations throughout my earlier years, and then ended up I got my own contractor's license and built homes in the area and some commercial work as well.
Oh, cool.
And then went to work for the building department back in 1986, and I've been there ever since.
So the building department's been around for how long?
Our best guess is it was developed in 1961, I believe, which would have been 54 years ago, something like that. So I've been there 29, almost 30 years of those 54 years, which is kind of I don't know what to think of that.
Yeah, we won't go into that, but I just think it's pretty cool that you've seen more than most in terms of the building department's development. So you entered the department kind of entry-level building inspector one. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I believe I was hired as a one,
Okay.
building inspector one, and started doing field inspections right off the bat. About 2 weeks of tutoring threw me to the wolves, and I was on my way.
Do you remember if that was something that you enjoyed, or was it kind of a tough job?
I did enjoy it. I was amazed at the amount of things that that I wasn't really prepared for to do inspections on, and so you had to really learn a lot of different things and different trades as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. Go to a lot of trainings, so you have some credibility when you're talking about doing the things the right way.
Right. Would you say that kind of just like the relationship between the inspectors and residents in the community is pretty much the same as it was when you started, or do you think it's changed?
Well, it's gone back and forth, and I think it has a lot to do with different personalities, and some personalities have different ways of regulating inspections and the types of things that need to be done. But for the most part, we try to stay on track with informing the public, informing the business owners, the politicians, and everybody else that safe buildings is what we want to provide the community, and that goes with emergency responders as well. They should know that the buildings that are being built are safe to enter during an emergency situation. So when we do our job properly, nothing happens.
That's an interesting point, Jeff, because when you're on the street, usually like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and they're the ones who are most talkative, and you hear, oh, the building department made me do this or made me do that. But if you really boil it down, these rules are in place for a reason. And I wanted to ask you about that. How do these various codes become developed and then implemented by the building department?
What the state of California used to be the international. It's now the International Code Council. Once upon a time, it was the ICBO, International Conference of Building Officials, and also there was different regions in the United States that were similar to that were specialized in their own code type of uniformity for different areas. Then in the 1996, I believe it was, they all got together and formed the International Code Council, so there was no regional boundaries when it came to code interpretation and code effectiveness. So that's why we have the International Code Council, which you'll hear ICC now. So how this works is every 3 years that we have a code cycles. The codes change. The Building Standards Commission will review the codes, and there are lots of agencies involved in code development. There's a Community Housing Development, which is HCD, Department of State Architects or Division of State Architects, Office of the State Fire Marshal's Office, and others that develop the codes. And they're in a code book. You'll see a matrix with all the players involved. They develop the codes. Codes go to hearing the Building Standards Commission. From there, the codes get adopted by the state in the form from the International Code Council to the state amendments, which is the state California's Code of Regulations based on the Building Standards Commission. So there's a long process which is given to us by state law. So every county, city, and every jurisdiction is mandated by the state of California to have building codes in place and to be enforced. And it comes from the state. So any local adoption of anything would never be less stringent. It would always be more stringent. So most jurisdictions go right with adopt the codes for what they are, unless there's some peculiarities within their jurisdictions.
So you're telling me that you guys don't just get drunk and make this stuff up and just put them in the code book?
I don't think we'd have that kind of an imagination. We have to interpret what they've given us, and that's really what my job and our department does, is interpret what the intent of the code is.
And I imagine, I mean, a lot of this stuff, you don't have any say in it. It comes down, and it's a state mandate, and you have to kind of make it work. And that must be present some challenges. I would
It
imagine.
absolutely does, and I'll use the sprinkler, residential sprinkler code for example, which was met with all kinds of gnashing of teeth and there were a lot of discontent. That came directly from the state. That was the state fire marshal's office. It's a mandate. It's a state law. It was came in with the 2010 codes that residential construction from that point on will be constructed with residential sprinklers. Now, the sprinkler systems themselves are not designed necessarily to preserve the building and the contents. It's to allow the occupants time to get out. So the theory of 7 to 10 minutes, you know, the place is burning down around your ears, you're out of there. And the properly operating sprinkler system will almost always confine the fire to the room of origin if it's triggered for the length of time that it's activated, usually at about 165 degrees. The materials that people have in their houses will create a flashover burning condition much quicker than, say, 40 years ago with the types of furniture and materials that were in the standard house years ago. So yes, the need to be aware of how fast you can get what they call flashover and dangerous fire situation in a residence is the sprinklers will help you not have a fatality in that situation when they're working properly.
So a flashover, is that like when it becomes like a rapidly burning fire sort of a thing?
Typically a flashover, it's interesting for those who would like to see what I'm talking about here. There are videos that show what flashovers are. They basically, when a room starts burning, it'll build up a lot of heat in the up around the ceiling, and then eventually the gases and unburned smoke will flash into a fire and basically spread the fire from one room to the next through the overhead and then usually down to the floor. So it's definitely a dangerous situation when it reaches that point.
Gotcha. And so the way the sprinkler works is it has like a temperature gauge, and if it hits, was it 165, then it would deploy. Does it deploy house-wide or just in one room?
Only in the room where the fire would be originated. So typically your 165-degree fusible link on those fire sprinklers will activate in the room where once that temperature reaches that point. And you generally confine the fire within that 7 to 10 minutes, which is usually an expected time when you can get emergency crews there to deal with it.
So I know that there's been some pushback from folks who think it's like an added expense, and you know maybe they shouldn't make us do this. But if you look at it from a safety perspective, which is again kind of the bottom line for the building department, this actually could save life and property.
Absolutely, there's no question about it. There's many studies that support this. Yes, it does add extra cost, and what doesn't? The Green Building Code, the various different types of state requirements, low flow fixtures, I mean, there's a variety of different things that if you add them all up, yes, it gets rather expensive. But I think in the case of sprinklers, like them or not, they do the job, and they are mandated by the state. So we do see them, and we haven't had any problems with the freezing or heads activating that I've heard of. So a lot of the horror stories you hear so far haven't become any way to initiate a negative response to the sprinkler. But there is a cost.
So if people want to find out more about the fire sprinklers and anything else we talked about tonight, would they just go to the county website and click on the building department?
That would be a good start. And then there's all kinds of information out there with the State Fire Marshal's office on sprinklers, and there's different videos that can show the effectiveness of it. With today's ability to get on a computer and find anything you want, there's a lot of stuff out there that is very informative.
So jumping back into kind of your progression, you started kind of at the bottom, and then over the 29 years, I imagine you worked some different positions within the department? Or?
That's correct. I went from, I believe, a 1 to a 2, merit increases up to the point to where I became a supervising inspector in charge of the crew of inspectors. then I think in 2009 is when I got this position handed to me permanently.
So was it kind of something you'd thought about over the years? Like, well, I wonder if you know, there's a chance for me to be the person in charge, that I would do that? Or was it more like you outlasted everyone else?
Well, it was probably a combination of both. I think that I was aware that if there was an opportunity that I would like to get a chance at doing that type of job, I felt that the county could get more out of. I could benefit the county more by advancing in these jobs, and the more I've learned and the more I was able to come under control of with the types of knowledge and the way that the job is done, would hopefully be beneficial to those that came along and would work for me at a later date.
Something that is kind of, that I'm finding interesting, is going from kind of like a managed position into a manager's position. And I don't know if you had some management experience before you kind of led the office, but you know, it's a very different sort of a job when you are responsible for a lot of personnel. And I believe you have, is it 9 people?
Yes, 9.
So 9 staff members. So what was that like for you to suddenly, you know, be the boss of 9 people and have to take on all these new responsibilities as the manager of everyone? Well,
first of all, I think there had to be an opportunity for me to establish the credibility, which required on my part to take examinations and have the certification through ICC as a certified building official. I believe that gives the position, if you don't respect the man, you respect the position. At least I was certified. Actually, the state requires building officials, building inspectors, plans examiners to have certifications and keep those maintained at 45 hours of every 3 years for those credits. So the fact that I became a manager was, I had a mid-management position prior to that. So having coming up from the ranks and basically knowing everybody in the office, it had its advantages and probably its disadvantages as well. But management is mostly about personnel.
Right, right.
It's all about personnel.
So one thing about the building department, it has an interesting funding structure that may be different from other departments, and I was hoping you could kind of go through how you guys are different in terms of how you are funded, because it's kind of interesting.
We do get our funding from permits revenues. So our revenues are permit generated. In other words, somebody buys a permit, that's what pays the way for us to do the business. We can't charge more than we can do the job for. So it's not a money-making thing. It is to defer the cost of doing business, and the Health and Safety Code is very clear about that. That money is also not to go into the general fund. It remains in the building department. So we build our budget based on our prospect of what we think we're going to get in the way of revenues through permits. By the way, we haven't raised our fees in 7 or 8 years. We're still doing those same fees. So the fact that we're operating in the black on old fees is only because we've had a spike in business. However, the staffing still remains an issue. From the loss of staffing, we can't provide all the unfunded services, and even some of the unfunded services, mainly, people would like us to do things that we really don't have the money or the people to do. So we stick with what we're supposed to do, and that's to authorize to build and authorize to occupy. So we take a pretty good estimate of what our revenues are going to be, and then we build a budget on the revenues and keep the expenditures to those line items that we are hopefully can maintain. So the good thing is we've been able to put away a little bit of reserve because, so to speak, we've sold more hamburgers than we thought we would. Yeah. So we've got a little reserve there that we can, rainy day money that we could use should we need it.
So it sounds to me like your staff and your department really kind of grows and shrinks with the housing market and the economy surrounding that?
Typically, that's what historically has happened. Yes, we had plenty of staff there at one point, and then when things fell apart, our department was the first one to take some massive cuts. We lost, I think, 4 inspectors in the first round, plan checker, and another inspector later. Some clerical staff, some code compliance people. So a lot of people went out the door, and then getting them back is always the hard part because everybody's afraid that this would happen again.
Do you know if, like in 2007 or the 2006 budget, that it was anticipated what was going to happen, or when did that hammer fall on the department?
Well, I was fortunately not in a management position at the time. I was in mid-management, but my budgetary concerns were not necessarily my main event. I was doing other things. So how the budget, I think we were during the community development agency when the planning and building was combined, was created a different type of scenario than we have now. So how the financing was calculated and distributed to provide for an agency versus a department was a different type of situation than what we have now.
So now that we have this, you said around 30%, projected or increase, and it looks like it's going to continue being good. Do you think that the department may grow, or are you going to continue to try to work with the current staffing?
The current staffing I have, well, we've had a couple of retirements, so I've been able to backfill one job, and I think we'll be able to backfill the other one here real soon. I'm asking for at least another plan checker. Hopefully that'll stay alive and well in the budget, because I think we're going to start seeing the amount of workload. In fact, we've already seen the amount of workload from the turnaround on a good submittal for a new dwelling would take a couple of weeks is now more stretched out to 4 weeks. And I think it could, because with one plan checker, one plans examiner doing everything in plans examination. I do a few different types of plans examination, but the workload will increase. So I think that's where we need to shore up.
So that's kind of a good example, just to help people, including myself, understand. Let's just use a house as an example. What interaction, let's say I bought a new property and I wanted to build a house on that. What interaction would I have with your department?
Well, typically what you would do if you came in stone cold and didn't have a clue, or even if you had a few times around, the idea here is to get the circulation in proper sequence. So when you come in with a submittal, the planning department is involved, the public works department is involved, and the environmental management department is involved. And those agencies are usually the ones that review your application before we get it. So we're like, everybody else is good with it. We're the last in line to actually be able to bring the submittal in. Sometimes they'll have deferred submittals like a sprinkler system. You haven't got your sprinkler design yet. We'll bring it in later and plug it in with the separate permit that it needs anyway. So what we would do is typically route you around to the different departments with your submittal, your application, and go through that process and to find out what more you may need or how everything situates. Then you would be in the mix with whatever your project is, to be next in line behind whoever's in front of you.
So the more permits being asked for, the more work there is, and the fewer staff, that might take longer, like you said, 2 weeks versus 4 weeks. And then let's say in 4 weeks, would you come back and say, we don't like this because of X, Y, Z, or would you say?
That could happen, because there's by the time we get a chance to look at the plans briefly at the counter and say, okay, you need a different plot plan, or you need a more involved plot plan, and that's usually where some of the problems come. So whatever may be needed to be added to those to that submittal should be identified at the counter, but not everything. So once the plans are reviewed, that's the first opportunity for the plan examiner to look at everything that's required by the code. So if there's some deficiencies in the plans that need to be brought up to the documents, so the construction documents match, then we would give you a call and inform you of what needed to be done. That doesn't mean you go to the very end of the line. There's a placeholder for you. So that way we can get the submittal complete approve the plans, which is that's what's going to be used out in the field for the inspectors to look at.
So is that kind of the next step? Once we get that initial approval, then you would visit the construction project at various times?
Correct. We have, typically we'll have the foundation inspection and then maybe an underfloor inspection before. There's on the inspection card, it says do not cover up or do not conceal these until these things have been signed off. So we encourage people to ask us what they need to not get ahead of themselves, so that saves everybody problems. Yeah. So it's fairly, and I can't emphasize enough for the need for good contractors and design professionals to that know this stuff, that have been around this business, to help guide people through the process and get an understanding of what they're up against.
And then at the end of it all, if everything's good, then you get a final. Is that kind of the last thing? Or?
Yes, a final approval and ready to occupy. So we authorize to build and authorize to occupy once everything is in its proper place. And in California these days, there's a lot of things to put in the proper place.
And how long can you go until you get that final, or is that like an indefinite?
Well, we're pretty generous on that. You can put in a submittal, and it's good for a year. So if you can't pick it up for a year, it's okay. We have an ordinance for that, or it was decided that a year would be some years ago that if you can't get to it for a year, then you have 6 months before you need an inspection. So that's 18 months before I would think you'd want to get going sooner than that, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. And then we also can do an extension on the permit for another 6 months. So there's plenty of time to produce some results.
So just in the last couple minutes that we have here, is there anything that you think the public should know, or you wanted to tell them about your department?
I think that we do the best we can to accommodate the needs of the public. There's a lot of things that we're charged with that falls under our responsibility. The fire protection is one thing. We help out the fire districts with some fire planning, and so far we've been able to do that, but if we get real busy, we're going to have an alternate way of handling that. We also, in new construction, alterations of existing buildings and that sort of thing, is accessibility requirements, and I believe that is one thing that takes up more of our time than you would ever imagine. It's important for business owners to understand accessibility. The Disabilities Act of 1990 has been here a while, and it's a federal civil rights law. It's not a code that we don't like or would like. It's federal civil rights. So anybody that has a business that provides goods and services to the public has to provide accommodations and architectural barrier removal. That's a federal law. It's building permit or not. So we get involved when there's building permits. So the California Code of Regulations is where the federal laws apply for what types of alterations and repairs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more to talk about. We're going to have to end the show here, but thank you for what you do with the limited staff. And if people want more information, they can go to the website, and we have your phone number.
That's correct. We have a lot of resources to steer people in different directions to hopefully give them the right answers, and I hope they call us and we can give them the right answer instead of hoping that they've heard something right from somebody else.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.